Hello again and welcome to The Bull. My name's Lester Kiewit.
And I'm Tara Roos.
And every week we talk politics, parliament and a little bit of a hot take, particularly around pop culture. Maybe. Good morning, Tara. How are you?
Good, how are you?
People have been asking, where's that dumpling spot?
Mr. Lynn's in Long Street. I responded to a few comments. Get the dumplings in chili oil.
Get the dumplings in
They're really
chili
good.
oil. Okay, let's get straight to what we have planned to talk about today. We're talking about the moves within the Patriotic Alliance. Kenny Kunene, the Patriotic Alliance's deputy president, he has been suspended, asked to step aside. He's essentially been put on ice, his political ambitions, by his party. And this is because he was found in the house of an alleged hitman who is being connected to various killings and shootings, connected tangentially to the allegations of Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Gayton McKenzie, the Patriotic Alliance leader, says while he believes Gayton McKenzie, he is instructing a law firm to investigate this. In the meantime, he's been put on, not special leave, he's been suspended, he's been removed from the party, and in his place, particularly within the Joburg Metro, one Liam Jacobs, your best friend. Did Liam text you and say, hi, I'm going to the Patriotic Alliance caucus in the Joburg Metro?
I don't even think Liam Jacobs knew he was going to the caucus in the Joburg Metro. What I think is so interesting is how quickly this all went down. Kenny Kunene had come out and said, he wasn't there for any nefarious activities. He took a journalist to the house, and that's why he was there. He just happens to be a victim of wrong place at wrong time, which we all know is a complete and utter farce.
Very, very busy job of being MMC of transport in the economic heartland of this country. He finds time. That's why he has 2 watches. He finds time in his very busy day.
2 watches and he still found himself at the wrong place.
Kenny Kunene, he rocks out with his clocks out. Then has time to take journalists to the home where they'll meet an alleged hitman. I don't think I buy that story.
I don't think anyone buys that story. But what I think is going to be so interesting is when Liam Jacobs first had initially announced his move to the Patriotic Alliance, everyone had theorized that maybe he was becoming an MMC because the former MMC of Environment had stepped down and was going to be moved to Parliament. He then did not become an MMC, and now he is going to. And Gayton McKenzie has said, Liam leads local government experience. He had recently announced his mayorship for City Council in Tshwane, and he wants to become the mayor of Pretoria. I think this is going to play out so interestingly. I mean, if Liam thought he had a hard time in the National Assembly, they are about to show him something different in local government. I think anyone who has ever been in local government or observed local government closely will know that it is just a different breed of politicians. It is a different level of hard. Local government, I would argue, is almost equally, if not just a little bit more difficult than national.
I don't think we should skirt away from the issue that in this country at the moment, we have politicians who are having uncomfortably too much proximity to gangsters, literal gangsters. This week, News 24 running a scoop saying that Keith Khoza is a key man in terms of the deputy presidency of Paul Mashatile, seen at the 50th birthday of one Edwin Sodi, who's connected to various issues of corruption, but also people who are involved within the underworld. Again, with the Patriotic Alliance, we cannot ignore that the Patriotic Alliance is a political party of when Gayton McKenzie himself says, I robbed banks.
He robbed a bank.
I robbed banks. And yes, I may know people. There have been various reports about the Patriotic Alliance's close connection to gangs and organized crime. There was a piece in the Mail and Guardian last year which questioned the connection between Gayton McKenzie, his criminal past, but also how the Patriotic Alliance starts as a party in Joburg. And the allegation from the Mail and Guardian was that drug money, that's the allegation put forward by the Mail and Guardian, that drug money was used to found this party, which now is part of a grand coalition led by the ANC.
I think something that is particularly interesting is one of the Patriotic Alliance's largest funders is Gayton McKenzie himself. And he often talks about how he owns various mining companies. In recent members' declarations to Parliament, he had declared that he was a part of 27 various boards, 21 of which are actually currently inactive. And there are a lot of discrepancies in where Gayton McKenzie actually gets his money from in terms of who is funding the Patriotic Alliance. They have not been forthcoming in terms of where the money is coming from. And I think that is really interesting. I wouldn't go as far to say that Gayton McKenzie is a gangster. I don't think that is necessarily a fair character assessment. I think, does he have close ties to the underworld? What politician doesn't? And I'm not saying that's an excuse.
Why are we comfortable with that? Why do we live in a country that, yes, and I know 62 million South Africans, but in fact, this country is very, very small. Everyone knows each other. But why are we comfortable when we say an associate of ex-politician, an associate of minister? Why are we comfortable as South Africans, or we take it as a given, that yes, politicians may know some dodgy people?
Even when you look in the city, when you look at MACO members of safety and security who have had alleged ties to the underworld, when you look at the close links between people who work in portfolio committees for transport and their ties to the taxi industry, those are all interconnected. You cannot work in South African politics and not know someone who could potentially put a hit out on someone. Like, I think that is something that is an uncomfortable truth and something we don't want to admit. I wouldn't say that I or the South African public are necessarily comfortable with Gayton McKenzie's ties, but I think it's something that when you look at the grand scheme of where the South African political landscape is, the ordinary South African doesn't care. I think to the ordinary South African, they see Gayton McKenzie out on the streets, they see him as one of the people. People often renege that he's probably one of the most humble politicians, although that might not directly translate to his leadership and what we see at a national executive level. People on the ground love Gayton McKenzie, and I think it ties down to the fact that people are willing to excuse anything for someone that they see themselves in. I think Gayton McKenzie embodies a lot of characteristics that, and when he often talks about his past, his upbringing, how he really did come from humble beginnings, how he made transgressions, how he turned his life around, I think he sells the narrative really well. And I don't think, unfortunately, despite there being numerous allegations, there is not enough hard, cut, clear evidence about Gayton McKenzie being a gangster for, I think, South Africans to be concerned.
I think South Africans should be concerned.
They should.
And let's be clear, the infiltration of organized crime, the illicit economy, is not something new that happens after 1994. In the 1970s and 80s with apartheid operations like Operation Coast, for example, and how Mandrax was used to pacify Cape Flats communities in the 1970s and 80s. That's the illicit economy at work with the apartheid government. Also in that same period, you have characters like Vito Palazzolo, a mafioso with the help and cooperation of the then former apartheid government, then finds home in South Africa. And then, very much documented that there was a divide and conquer approach where the apartheid government pre-94 supports one faction of Cape Town organized crimes and street gangs. Another side is brought in with the ANC and the military campaign pre-1994 to help galvanize support for the ANC. So organized crime has very much been used as a helpful political tool, whether it be in the apartheid dispensation or a democratic dispensation. But then you have to ask the question, has South Africa then always been collected to a somehow quasi-mafia state?
It has, and I think whether we're looking at an economic perspective, how a concentration of very few companies donate monies to various political parties. I mean, we often talk about white monopoly capital and how that has infiltrated various government sectors. But I think the biggest critiques of Gayton McKenzie and the Patriotic Alliance is not coming from people who vote for the Patriotic Alliance. And I think that is because, in a very similar way in which gangs, specifically in the Western Cape and in Cape Town, have been able to infiltrate communities in which they feed communities, they send kids to schools, but they're still pumping drugs back into the communities because they buy the community support in various aspects where the government has failed, and they provide almost a social security net. The Patriotic Alliance does the same. I think the DA has often accused them of buying votes in terms of buying people food, sponsoring people, making these videos about upliftment in the community. But to people in those very vulnerable communities, they see Gayton McKenzie and they see the Patriotic Alliance as a lifeline, as they have been neglected by the government, and the Patriotic Alliance and Gayton McKenzie is now stepping in to help them and save them. And so it actually doesn't matter what allegations come. Any member of the Patriotic Alliance is where they're still going to vote for them.
So like starting foundations like a Jocelyn Smith Foundation that never materialize. Gayton McKenzie makes promises. If you drill a little deeper into those promises, very, very few materialize. And whether that is sincere politics, I think it's not.
But you and I are not the Patriotic Alliance voter base. And I think that is the key distinction.
So what are you trying to say about the Patriotic Alliance voter base? What are you trying to tell us?
You're trying to give me candle on the internet.
Tell us what you think about the Patriotic Alliance voter.
I think, in my personal opinion, and I mean, I think this is just like a broader take overall, I mean, I think coloured nationalism is just a stupid ideological value to hold. Like, when you look intrinsically, I have debated and argued and talked to many people who deeply believe and hold near to their soul that coloured people are the most marginalised group in this country, and I think that it is completely and utterly nonsense. I think that there is no logical argument for the Patriotic Alliance's ideology, specifically as it relates to coloured nationalism and ethno-nationalism, and we look at the rise of populism. It just makes absolutely no sense. And what I think we do not talk about enough when it comes to the Patriotic Alliance is how deeply entrenched racism is within the Patriotic Alliance voter base. Because they're always like one step away from that racist line, because it's always, we coloured people have been so disenfranchised.
And we forget Abambe.
Yeah.
Gayton McKenzie says that if the Patriotic Alliance were in government, he would shut down, he would pull the plug on a life support machine of someone who just happens to not be South African.
And I think, you look at a lot of the things Gayton McKenzie has said of these. He wants to put God back into the Constitution. He will never be able to do that. He wants to bring back the death penalty. I think he speaks to a lot of traditionalist values that are very prominent in the coloured community as a whole.
Well, that makes you an instant hero, because if you say that, knowing you can't deliver, you can always then deflect and saying, see, we're up against a system here. You create the bogeyman of a constitution, which, and I'll put my life on the line. We're never changing that Section 1 of the Constitution when it comes to the death penalty. But look down at the comments, you just made a lot of people upset.
I make a lot of people upset often, and I think the hard line that I will draw consistently is, while I unequivocally believe in the Patriotic Alliance's right to exist as a political party, I think that is an aspect of democracy that I will never deny. I don't think that any person with rational logic could vote for the Patriotic Alliance and seemingly make an argument for that political party.
Can the Patriotic Alliance be an aspect of our democracy when there is no democracy in the Patriotic Alliance?
No. And I also think that's so funny, is that there are so many contradictions in the Patriotic Alliance and no one addresses it.
Says he is a dictator. There are no elections in the Patriotic Alliance.
Yeah. The one thing that Gayton McKenzie has that a lot of politicians don't is personality. And unfortunately, we live in a country where personality politics wins. I think Gayton McKenzie is willing to put himself out there and try and appeal to the masses in many ways that other politicians are that would want to be more reserved.
It's very easy when you're taking pictures with winning South African sport teams. But back to Liam Jacobs. He's now in the Joburg Metro Council.
Yeah.
Who's standing for election in the Joburg Metro Council in 2026? It's Helen Zille. Is Liam Jacobs going to contest on a Patriotic Alliance ticket in the Joburg Metro going up against Helen Zille?
I honestly think him taking up Kenny Kunene's seat, although I understand the logic that he needs local government experience, because he had announced his mayorship for the city of Tshwane. I find it quite odd because I understand why they put him up in Tshwane, right? I mean, the DA had a stronghold there. It's also this idea that Liam Jacobs was a member of the DA, and Cilliers Brink, who was the former mayor of the city of Tshwane, has also made his position clear that he would like to return as mayor. And so it's this idea of like the people within the City of Tshwane Council who are DA members also know Liam Jacobs. So it's like, how do you go up against someone who was your own? He might know your secrets, you know his secrets. How do you play that game? And it's a very tactical idea. Now putting Liam in local government in the city of Joburg and then having him to move back to the City of Tshwane, I don't really see how that logistically is going to make any sense. But him being an MMC is something I'm very interested to see his governance experience. And what I think is so interesting is when we did our first episode on Liam Jacobs, we got a lot of flack. Specifically, I got a lot of flack for saying, why is he posting these TikTok videos? Like, I think that it's quite trivial. And Liam tweeted out yesterday, he was like, to post about something online is easy. Now it's where the real works begin, actually doing something. And I think that further affirms my point that his performance in Parliament was just that. It was a performance. He wasn't delivering any real change. Now he has the opportunity to actually do something, and we'll have to see what materializes it.
Delidong indeed. Let's go to Parliament now. And we spoke very briefly about the South African Constitution. I believe that the death penalty would never return. But the South African Constitution is a living, breathing document. It's not set in concrete. It can be changed. There's already been 21 constitutional amendments to the South African Constitution. Action SA in Parliament, they want to bring in the 22nd Amendment to the South African Constitution. It's the 22nd Amendment Bill, and they want to abolish, amongst other things, they want to abolish deputy ministers. They want ministers to be vetted, almost like a confirmation process, like we see in American politics. The president nominates and then essentially the legislature then interviews. Also, it wants to expand the presidential prerogative. The president has the option of choosing 2 people from outside of Parliament, just for education. You first have to be an MP to be a minister, except for 2 people, which the president can decide. Action SA wants to increase this presidential prerogative from 2 to 4. Why does the Action SA want to change the constitution?
Their big thing is cost cutting. I will say I do disagree with their numbers. They say that they are going to save the South African public 1.5 billion annually. I ran the numbers yesterday after someone highlighted to me that they think that the numbers are inflated. I come to 1.2, which is still a massive saving. I'm not going to be too fickle on that. I would love to know where they got 1.5 from. I, as someone who has a background in policy, am very fickle on a lot of these private members' bills and amendments that come through Parliament. This is probably, and I say this very unbiasedly, one of the strongest pieces of legislation that I've read in a while that I strongly agree with. And I think that it takes a lot for me to say that. I think I was very hard on Action SA after the whole Budget 2.0 fiscal framework saga where they thought they could reverse the VAT increase. And I was like, you actually have no competent understanding of how parliamentary rules and procedure works. And they've changed my opinion on that. I think this is a really strong bill, a really strong piece of legislation. But something that I'm quite sad about is that I see no likelihood in how this passes. Something that I think is so interesting, and I aspire, in my personal life at least, to be the level of petty that Action SA is towards the Democratic Alliance, because this is basically just an expanded version of the DA's 2023 Remuneration of Office Bearers Bill.
Which then lapsed.
Which then lapsed. And now the DA is in government. I mean, the DA for a long time was calling for the abolishment of deputy ministers. Now they have their own deputy ministers. And I think that this is a really strong bill. I am someone who fights really strongly against this notion that, we constantly just need to scrap various government departments and various people in office. South Africa is a massive country. There are 60 million people. It takes a lot to run a government. And I think that there are positions within government that play a key role. I don't think that deputy ministers are one of them.
Is the problem deputy ministers? Because the next president who comes in says, well, I want only 12 ministers and therefore only 12 deputy ministers, which the president can decide. Ironically, when Cyril was elected in, where are we now? In 2019, he had promised a trimmed down government with a grand coalition where you have to satisfy so many interests.
Yeah.
I don't think that was
Still made a lot of
possible.
promises in 2019.
And so we now sit with South Africa's largest cabinet, 42 ministers.
Yeah.
Actually make that 43 because we'll have Tara Roos, Kechalia and Senzo Mchunu is still. So technically we're still paying for 43 ministers. But what's the real issue here? Where's the real drain? Is it ministers who theoretically next election cycle could be trimmed down to 12, or is it the 1.6 million public servants, particularly a bloated middle management sector of the South African public service?
I think it's absolutely, as someone who works in government, I think it's laughable when you look at the staff size of the executive, but the low output that some of these government departments have. I think when you look at a deputy minister, you have to factor in not just their salary, you're looking at their private secretary, you're looking at their security detail, the cars that they drive. For every DG, there's a DDG who has a personal assistant, who has an intern, who has someone who actually doesn't do anything. And I think that is what this bill is trying to address, because there are a lot of middle management people within the South African government whose jobs are redundant.
Do we need more nurses? Yes. Do we need more teachers? Yes. Do we need more police officers? Yes. But we also need to look at these thousands of ghost jobs that are currently in the public service. Let's do an audit and get that out of the way. Before you get another phone call from Athol Trollop, also part of their proposals is also to have cabinet ministers be removed by the legislature, by MPs. Currently, the president appoints and disappoints. But Action SA says, well, we would actually want to call motions of no confidence in ministers.
And I think that is something that is really important. I'm very big on putting the power back into Parliament. I think that it is the country's largest legislative body, but it's the country's most important body rather. And I think that it's extremely important, specifically when you look at how within the executive that is almost ultimately determined by the president. We as the public have no say in who the president appoints as a minister, who the president removes as a minister, but we do have a say on who the MPs are in Parliament and how that is split up. And I think it is really important in order to put more power back into Parliament in order to hold the executive accountable.
Likelihood of a 22nd constitutional amendment, they could get plenty of support, public support. It is a very emotive issue and a politically driven issue, which they could tell voters in 2029, look, this is what we wanted. Those other parties, they didn't support us. They would need a 2/3 majority as well as approval from the NCOP to have this constitutional amendment approved.
Unfortunately for Action SA, they can't do this without the DA. The ANC is never going to approve this bill. That is so far gone within the water. Could the DA be convinced? Potentially. I do feel, though, that the relationship is very sour between Action SA and the DA for a history and myriad of reasons. They need those 87 seats from the DA, and I think they could do this with the DA. Will the DA vote for this bill? It is very unlikely, but what I would be so interested in is how does the DA then spin this narrative to the public? Because this is what the DA voted for or campaigned for rather all along, is that they wanted to trim down government, they wanted to get rid of deputy ministers. I mean, this bill is just an accelerated version of a bill that the DA had originally put forward that had lapsed now that they have been in government. How are they then going to vote against this in the public eye, when this was also another supposed red line of theirs?
Why do you have deputy ministers in the first place? Okay, so from what I understand, deputy ministers perform no executive role. Deputy ministers are part of the executive, they're not part of cabinet. And only a minister can fill in for another minister. Yeah. You can't have Senzo Mchunu being put on special leave and have the deputy minister then go into his position. It doesn't work like that. But then what then is the job of deputy ministers, except when there are parliamentary questions in which the minister is expected to reply, they on business elsewhere in the country, and then the deputy minister comes, or in certain instances the deputy minister then does chair certain state entities, like the deputy Minister of Finance is also the chairperson of the PIC as well. So there would be some link between your job as deputy minister and chairing an important state entity?
I think, so this is the big argument, right? Deputy ministers are not constitutionally mandated. And unfortunately, they just have become a symbol of bureaucracy and just someone else there for the sake of having someone else there. I think that there are certain government departments where I could rationalize having a deputy minister in which I think that they perform a critical role. DIRCO is one of them. Finance is another one of them. I would also argue energy and electricity, I think, could be something else.
Then why not permanent undersecretaries who are then rank and file bureaucrats?
Yeah.
You could have an undersecretary or an assistant minister in international relations, but is in fact on the level of a DG, has been trained in diplomacy, who is au fait with the South African national interest. And so therefore, that person then gets deployed to speak in Geneva or in New York at the United Nations, but with this backing that they are an entrenched bureaucrat and not some political office bearer.
I think there needs to be a complete overhaul of the executive. I think oftentimes Parliament gets put in a really bad light, and I think MPs are often really under dissection consistently, but what we don't look at enough is the composition of various government departments, specifically the split between the department and the ministry, right? Because those are also two completely different things. Is that we double up on many roles, and sometimes it's needed. Like, you need a department spokesperson and you need a ministry spokesperson, but there are also other duplicate roles within the department versus the ministry that I don't think that we look at enough, and I think that the executive as a whole needs to be dissected, and we need to cut so many of those jobs.
Okay, time now for hot takes of the week. I thought we'd talk about you being a youth and all that, young person. Recently, the United Kingdom has approved legislation that would see 16-year-olds voting in national elections. Already in Wales and Scotland, 16-year-olds can vote in local government elections. Not the only country. Brazil has also lowered its voting age. New Zealand has a discussion at the moment to lower the voting age to 16 years old. There are various countries that say not 21, not 18, 16-year-olds can vote. And I'll let you go first because this is a conversation about you and your peers and your friends.
My constituents.
Your constituents, your friends. Should we lower the voting age from 18 to maybe 17?
No.
16?
No.
Okay.
No. I hear you. And I hear the argument.
You haven't heard my argument.
No, I know what your argument's going to be. And I think it's the argument of many South Africans, right? Is that often the youth in South Africa have to take on a lot of responsibility. Should they not then get a say in how the country is run? Absolutely not. I fight really strongly against this, and I understand. I make the argument, I'm like, kids are stupid. Adults are also stupid, but adults are a little less stupid than kids. And I think when you look at, why would you let someone who can't legally do other things like drink or drive have a say in the government composition?
Well, there are other countries in the United States you can't drink till you're 21, but you can vote at 18.
Yeah, but that's because of a state legislation.
You can buy a gun at 16.
Yes, but those are because of state legislations that affected federal legislation. That's a completely different story. And why would we martyr ourselves after the United States? I think that letting 16-year-olds vote is a bad idea. I think that when you look at the disengagement and the apathy amongst young South Africans, I don't think lowering the voting age is going to change that at all. I don't think that there is enough civic education and emphasis on just critical thinking amongst the youth to give them the right to vote. I think that there is such a disengagement with critical political discourse and making sure that you are informed about your decision to vote. I think that voting is a big responsibility, and I don't think that the youth is fully capable at 16 rather to take that on.
I would argue, my counter would be, I know 60 years old that are as ignorant, as disaffected, as disengaged, and completely dumb about political process as you're putting, 16 years old. The only difference is they've lived most of their lives. A 16, 17-year-old can have the say in South Africa that they want to see. And why should you? If you are 17 years and 363 days old, Why should your future be determined by someone who's probably going to pop their clogs within the next few years?
I agree that I think there needs to be an amendment that if you turn 18 within the year of voting, then you should be able to vote.
So you agree 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote?
I wouldn't say at large. I think there needs to be an amendment. If you are turning 18 in that year, because I know there are many people that they turn 18 in that year, but just because their birthday is after voter registrations, they're not allowed to. I think that should be an amendment that should be made. I don't think 16-year-olds should come near a ballot box. And I know that that seems like quite contradictory because I am a young South African, but as a young South African, I can tell you firsthand these kids don't know nothing about what's going on in government. And I think that yes, there are many 60-year-olds, many 40-year-olds, many 30-year-olds who are politically disengaged, but I would argue that those are too far and in between. As you get older and you become more affected by life, you do start to take more of an interest in politics, and there are interested and active and engaged 16-year-olds. There is no doubt about that. I was one of those people, but those kids are few and far in between.
Well, what did the 2024 election tell us, and the build-up and the registration, is that the greatest number of people registering were between the ages of 18 and 25. It was the access.
But they also had the lowest voter turnout. So that's also another thing I fight strongly against, is that I think we should rather focus our time, effort, and energy into equipping the already large and robust voter base before we try and seek out more voters. Well, ultimately, I would also say I don't think that it would make much of a dent in the electorate as a whole.
Do you think it wouldn't affect the outcome of an election if, say, we add 3, 4, 5 million new voters between the ages of 16 and 18? Do you think it would have a particular change in the makeup of parliamentary representation?
Not largely,
no. Do you think the status quo would remain the same?
Relatively, yes. Because I think even if we had to add, say, an extra 3 or 4 million people to the electorate, out of that, only 1.2 would vote. And out of that, it would be split across the various political parties. And I also think that I fight strongly against this notion that everyone thinks like, oh, they just don't want to add young people to the vote because they don't want to have leftist progressive parties be voted into government. And I think that's not true. I think that even if you had to sample size, that it is only a very small minority of the South African youth that I would determine is radically left. But I just don't think it's a good idea.
It's a hot take of a hot take. Tara Roos, thank you as always. Really appreciate it. Put your comments down below. You can offer our viewers another place where you can buy what?
Matcha. I know you're a good matcha spot.
It tastes like grass.
It's so good.
And you can drop a comment. So you can watch us every week on YouTube and let us know if you have a question about politics, parliament, or you want another suggestion from Tara. Till we chat to you next time, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.